So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Run It Back, episode number 6. I'm Menelik Fernandez, and this is the first of the Run It Back series that's going to try and take on some professional basketball. We've been completely college oriented to this point. Somebody's got a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure who that is, so I'm going to mute. Uh, I'm going to mute just in case. Sorry, guys. We're very fortunate today. We've got Charles Dube-Brais joining us, who is the assistant coach with the Raptors 905, as we take on the Raptors 905 versus the Stockton Kings for this episode. Just for those of you who would be the first time ever tuning in, the premise of this show is we take teams that have played each other previously in the past season, and we use their past games as a sample size to kind of create a imaginary run it back scenario where we would be playing those teams again. And like I said, today we're taking on the 905 standpoint. Before I get into our usual poll of if we believe the one team can beat the other team, I'm going to give you a little bit of background of the game that happened this season. So the Stockton Kings and the Raptors 905 played once this past season. It was on February 12th. It was in Mississauga, Toronto, at the Paramount Center. And the Raps lost 107-104. It was the last game before the All-Star break for the G League. The Raps were up at the half by 1, and they were actually up by 10 at the end of the third quarter. They even went up 16 in the fourth quarter. Unfortunately, ended up losing towards the end. And just sort of something that stuck out on the sheet was the Raps shot 51% and 22% from the three on 5 of 23 shooting. The Kings shot 48% from the field and 34 from three on 11 of 30. So we'll start with a poll. And this poll we do every time. So obviously don't feel afraid to answer honestly because Charles is in here. But basically, do we think that the 905 can beat the Kings in a rematch? Charles, you're clearly going to influence this answer. All right. So it looks like we are predominantly yes. We got an 87% yes, and we got a 14% unsure. So before I get into clips or anything like that, anybody, Charles included, of course, hot stove model, feel free to come in with some initial thoughts on what they saw.
I can break the ice.
Let's do that, please.
On the first one. Yes, totally. I mean, we were up 16 in the fourth quarter. So to answer that question, I mean, this game is one of the last times, one of the last games that highlighted our inability to finish games out, which was a recurrent problem during the season. We played a pretty good game because Stockton's a good opponent, and being up 16 in the fourth quarter means that you're doing stuff right, and we were pretty close to getting that W, but unfortunately we couldn't finish it out, and Isaiah Canaan got hot in the fourth quarter. But definitely it's a beatable opponent, and we had our struggles early on, but we finished, if my memory is good, we were 11-3 in our final 14 games, which was the best record in the league at that point. And Stockton is one of those 3 losses. So we were really good at the end of the season, and I feel like Stockton being one of the good teams in the league, but we could have definitely beaten them just like we beat almost anybody at the end of the season.
So being a season ticket holder who sits front row, I would definitely agree with you. I watched a lot of your basketball this year. And obviously we're going to take on the 905's perspective being a Toronto guy. So I'm going to ask some of the guys to just sort of comment on this. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just wondering so first of all, are we good at this size? Give me a thumbs up, or should I maximize it? I'm just wondering what people feel both teams are trying to establish their first couple plays of the game. And then I want to ask a little bit of perspective in terms of if a team is trying to establish something that's not from your scout, are you making adjustments right away, or are you going to let them continue to go to it? So here's the Stockton Kings first play. Nice little horns flex action. And then I actually put in their second play down the floor because I do think that they were trying to show a trend of establishing something. And then here's your Raps first play of the game. Doesn't turn out quite as well, but I think still also leads to something. So I'll stop the share and I'll ask anybody to jump in. First play of the game, how important do you guys think that you are trying to establish something right off the bat? And if you are playing on the defensive end and somebody else is showing that, do you make any sort of adjustments based upon what they're doing?
I can hop in. I think first play of the game for me, most people come in with a set that they think they can get a basket with. So I don't necessarily know if they're trying to establish something yet. It might just be a set that the coach really likes. For me, if we give up a bucket first play of the game, I'm not going to panic and go away from everything we spent the week preparing. Now, if it hurts us over a series of 5 to 7 minutes or something, maybe I make an adjustment. But the first possession of the game, probably not. But maybe first 5 possessions, they come down and they cramming it on the block against us and we weren't expecting it. Maybe I call timeout and make a little bit of an adjustment or something.
So for you, like I actually share your point of view, Brant. For me, I'm not worrying too much if they're saying like they're going to identify a mismatch or something like that. But I actually have a fine line, and that's related to points as to where I'm probably going to call that timeout and make some adjustments. I'm wondering if anybody else shares that sort of same idea. Like, what is the point where you get to where you're like, hey, adjustment needs to be made, and what's going to happen there?
Yeah. One timeout during a run.
8-0, it's probably time.
I hate it because I think it's more powerful if your dudes figure it out on their own. But 8 points, 9 points, anything over 3 possessions for me, I typically call timeout.
Clay, did you have something there?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of agree with the point you guys were making, was that I guess it kind of just depends on what they're trying to accomplish, because a lot of times you'll see people just drop an ATO and that's the only time they go to that particular set. But then you'll see a couple times where a team might try and take advantage of a particular matchup per se. And I think if it's the latter, then you might have to think about making an adjustment. But usually, at least from what I've seen, if it's a particular ATO where they're just trying to get one action and then they're done with it, then there's not really much you do about it.
CDB, question for you. You had mentioned to me before we started the recording that this one was your scout. When you get the chance to go through stuff when you're coming into the game, do you try to establish something? Are you playing the game within the game of the first couple minutes of, hey, let's see if we can get some easy stuff here, get going, get some momentum type deal? Or is it just kind of you go with the series that you are strongest, most familiar with?
Typically Coach Jama will go, like, first play will be something we have in the book and that, we don't have to call out loud, and we're just like trying to get a bucket right away. Not necessarily, I would say, establishing something, but there's always obviously a thought process behind the play. Like, why would we run that one instead of another one? Would probably be based off concepts that we've seen on tape that maybe they have a hard time guarding this type of action or this type of action. And we typically have a few things in the playbook that will correlate to that and we can use at that specific moment in the game. Now, as for them, I thought Stockton this year was one of the teams that had the best ATOs, like of all the teams I was scouting. And they showed it on the first 2 plays. So I didn't think they were necessarily trying to establish anything, but they definitely had some really good cards to play in their pocket and they would use them wisely. And first play of the game is one of those, 12 situations that you have in a game, which are basically free ATOs, well, beginning of quarters and the TV timeout. So you have at least 12 of those, not even talking about the end of game situation. So they were really good at that, and they showed, and I definitely saw those first 2 plays were not plays that were commonly used in their playbook. They were like just scripted stuff that they wanted to run to get buckets early on, and that would establish their rhythm.
You didn't feel that Micah in particular was someone that they were trying to go to exploiting a matchup type deal? I mean, he had a pretty good game in there. I think I saw 19 and 11, but I found from watching a lot of G League games, there weren't a lot of true back to the basket type bigs. Obviously, the game's going away from that, and they try to punch him early, it looks like to me.
Yeah, I mean, Mika is one of the best true fives in the league. Like, he had a 10-day contract just prior to that. I think it was his first game back. So they were obviously going to go to him at some point. I don't think those plays were specifically meant to, like, have him exploit the post-up situation. But, you know, you're going to go through your best players, and Mika is one of those guys, like him and Kanan and Kyle Guy. You know, those are the main cogs for them to use in those situations. So I felt, yeah, there's a chance they go to him, but what are they really trying to accomplish? Probably not a true post-up situation with him. So it's harder to see them coming. Like, actually, Stockton does a good job at that.
Very interesting. I got one more poll just sort of before we move on to the next topic. And the reason for this poll is the majority of us are high school or college, university type coaches. And a lot of us obviously would like to move up in level. I mean, obviously we got some other G League guys in here as well, but like in terms of moving up in a level, let's say you got your opportunity and you are now charged with being the person responsible for the scout. So in this scenario, it's actually CDB who did this scout, which is kind of awesome to have him in here. But the question for me is if you are charged with doing this scout as somebody who is coming from a quote unquote lower level, what are the things that you would focus on in terms of starting your scout? So there's a selection here. And for those watching the YouTube link later on, it's personnel, key actions, mistakes maybe the 905 made, or other things, and we can explain afterwards. But just what would you focus on if you got this opportunity to move up and go from there? Greg, you put something in the chat here. Let's take a look while you guys do this first. It's interesting. We're all leaning towards the mistakes for a future game. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. I'll close the poll. I'm just sending the link to the room to somebody who can't seem to get in for some reason. All right. Okay, so let's where'd my poll go? We got basically 57% said the focus of what you would scout or implement for the next one would be the mistakes that the 905s made. 29% said key actions of the Kings, and only 14% said the personnel going forward. So anybody who is talking about mistakes, please jump in. Give me a share. What would you put in there in terms of moving forward? Just corrections or?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Menelik.
Sounds good.
I just think of it as like a series type deal, right? Like going from game 1 to game 2 to game 3. I think the adjustments you're trying to make need to be specific to what you're, the mistakes that you made. So if you don't correct the mistakes, they're going to keep exploiting them. And as a coach, you got to give an answer to your guys. Like, yeah, you're going to have the personnel in mind, the actions in mind, but if you don't correct, like, conceptually what they're doing, you have no chance at winning.
So for Jimmy, let me just sort of ask you a question on that. Is the majority of that going to be at your level film type stuff, or are you going to do some on-floor stuff? And if it is any on-floor stuff, what are you going to throw in there? And anybody else, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the time of the year and how much time you have. And, like if it's a series like in the G League where, you got one day in between the games, it's going to be a lot of film and maybe just walking through it so they at least see it. But, 3 out of 4 times is going to be mostly film, and maybe 25%, walking through it.
Did anybody in here notice any particular mistakes, so to speak, in this game that you immediately are like, I got an eye twitch and I want to clean that up?
I noticed something. I thought the Kings did a really good job of exploiting those empty corner ball screens with number 12. I think that's who y'all were talking about a minute ago.
What did you call it just now? Sorry? Indie corner ball screens?
The empty corner ball screens.
Oh, empty corner ball screens. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just think the Kings did a really good job of exploiting that. I think the Raptors did a could have made some adjustments on that. There were several instances where I couldn't tell if they were just confused on their coverage or not, because there were a lot of times where I think the big was really focused on retreating to the roller, and that would allow whoever the ball handler was to be able to get to the rim pretty easily.
Interesting. I got if anybody else doesn't want to jump in, I got 3 things that I really noticed in here, and CDB, take a look as well. Let me know your thoughts on this. But one of the big ones for me was the straight line drives in the first half of this game. So I'm gonna share one more time, just give you guys some feedback. Maybe some of you didn't get a chance to go through the game or whatever, but there were a few in here that crushed me a little bit when I was watching. We're good size-wise. Everybody give me a thumbs up. Awesome. So, I mean, most of these are first half. I think it got cleaned up towards the second half, but we got a couple twists and then just, like, straight blow-by. What do we have here? I think he rejects here and just, again, straight line drive right to the bucket. And this is in transition. They don't actually end up scoring. We get a massive recovery block out of it, but it's just a straight blow-by in transition. Another one in transition. And there's a roll in behind there, and that's just kind of taking on a big. I don't really see that as a blow-by, but all sort of fits into the same picture. And then the alley ball screen. This one's contested. It's pretty good, but all painting the same picture that I'm trying to paint of, hey, a lot of, like, they're playing the screen and roll with 2. They're not really tagging, and that is causing a lot of confusion between the ball handler's man and the screen defender's man. And I'm just wondering, sort of, like, what are you guys saying at halftime? How are you cleaning it up? Are you deciding to start tagging, etc.? All those fun coaching points.
I mean, for me, the big thing is, like, that I noticed when we're losing, it's we come in, just guard the fucking ball. Like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, we have the same issue. Like, and it's not like, let's not change what we do. Let's just do what we do better. Like, we've had a good, like, 2 years ago, we had a really good defensive team, and the times we're down, we're like, just play the ball. I think that's what it comes down to.
So like a big one we've discussed on this show a lot too. Like, I know that Jimmy has mentioned it to me in other Zooms, etc. But, like, a big one to me is, like, if we're going to go over and be in drop, trying to invite that 15 to 18 foot jump shot type deal, you've got to get into your man and force him to use it. Like, I feel sorry for some of these slow-footed, bigger guys that are trying to get to both sides of the screen all the time against a 6'2" freak athlete who would destroy him in a 60-yard dash type deal, and they're trying to go back and forth on that. So it's like there's not contact, there's not guarding the guy, there's not keeping him in front. But, like, are you guys losing your mind at halftime just telling them to be better? Or are you, like, I mean, Jimmy said he's not getting away from what he's doing, but is anybody else making changes? Charles, what are you doing? Are you yelling and screaming, or, like?
I mean, this was overall a pretty good defensive game for us. I mean, you have to keep in mind that these are, professional athletes. I mean, some of these guys have legitimate NBA experience. So it's not as easy as it sounds in terms of, like, just guarding the ball, because a lot of these actions, like you mentioned, some of them happen in transition. That was one of the keys of the game, and that is the main thing I think we didn't do well in that game. That's how they came back, actually. Isaiah Canaan can pull up from 30 feet. Your pickup point is basically at half court. You got to slow the ball down, and we didn't do that at the end of the game. It also happened on some of the clips you showed where, they get a drive in transition, and obviously you got to guard that. But like I said, it's a little easier said than done with that level of players. If you coach, when I was coaching at the high school level 15 years ago, there's a lot more situations where your guys can actually just stop the guy with the ball. But now the guy you're trying to stop is a guy that made millions of dollars in his life. So it's a little different, and it has to be more of a team thing, I believe. I think the fact that you want to do what you do better in terms of just always changing and adjusting is a really good point. That's something you want to do, because I felt we lost that game because we didn't do well enough what we should have done. down the road. And bottom line is we gave up 107 points to one of the best offensive teams in the league. I think they were number one or number two in offensive efficiency prior to that game. So you're facing a team averaging 1 million points per game, and you're keeping them to 107 when the average in the G League for a game for a team is approximately 110. And I think they average something like, 115 points per 100 possessions, something like that. So overall, even if you highlight all the buckets we gave up, you'd think like, well, there's a lot of mistakes right there. Well, no shit. It happens to both teams, and that's why basketball games end up in the hundreds. So I felt we should have done some stuff better. But there's always a reason, like, when one of those straight line drives is clearly from a situation where the ball is swung to the weak side. Our guy is covering the nail. He's a little slow to recover right there. It's a tricky situation to tell him just guard it, because he also has nail responsibilities prior to that. And we are not a tagging team. Like, we would very rarely tag people because it's just not what we do. We try to guard ball screens 2-on-2. And as a result, we give up typically less threes. We're one of the best 3-point defenses in the G League. So since we're not tagging, it also means that people have to be in their gaps. And if you swing it quick, you'll get opportunities to attack closeouts, which will lead sometimes to straight line drives. And we should be there to prevent it, and we didn't do it well enough. But I don't think it was to a point where we should have completely changed our strategy.
So I have two questions about that, which kind of lead into my next thing about tagging or not tagging. I kind of assume that I know your answer, having spoken to Gemma about it a little bit, etc. But like at my level, tagging is not really an option. Although not tagging is not really an option. Although I am beginning to be persuaded about the standpoint, because I want to give up less threes, like you mentioned, etc. But is there a point in your mind where, like, the consensus that I'm receiving is that as you go up in levels, I mean, obviously you've coached pro overseas as a head coach, and then now you're in the G League, and as you mentioned, you're a high school coach a long time ago, etc. Working through the levels, do you have to have a better tolerance for error and just kind of be like, screw it, next play, or like, are there still quite a bit more teaching moments even at this level where you have to jump in and say, hey, like, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, and then, like, I mean, we have to make the adjustment here. I mean, what are you giving Gemma as your head coach doing this? Like, hey, it's probably time to start tagging. When does that happen, if it does?
I mean, once again, your threshold will vary on the games and what you're giving up, and understanding that at some point you will give up something. Like, it's a level where players are way too good offensively not to score at some point on something, and your choices are more like, hey, you're hoping that out of pick and roll situations you'll give up 20 points instead of giving up 28, and that might be the difference between winning and losing. So anytime you're giving up a bucket, like we would have that debate the year before, anytime we faced Delaware, because they had Norvell Pell dunking alley-oops on our heads all the time. But so it looked bad, but at some point you're thinking it's also only 2 points. It just looks bad when it happens, and you got to be ready for that to happen 3 to 4 times a game, because that's what you're going to give up, right? But when it happens, you can't be like mad and be yelling about like, hey, why did we give up this? No, it's part of the plan. Like, it will happen. They will find him at some point. So there's still, to your other element, there's still a lot of teaching moments and a lot of film to do. We do a ton of film. The next day we have those defensive, offensive edits that we're going to show the team, where you're trying to teach them the little nuances that will amount to one more stop here, one more stop there. Because it's hard. That's the one thing at that level, is that if you're going into a drop in a no roller behind scheme where it's a 2-on-2 coverage, well, I mean, if you're not perfect, if you commit a little too much of the ball, it's going to be an alley-oop. And if you don't commit enough, well, that guard is an NBA guard. He's taking it all the way to the rim. And it's the same for us on offense. When it was, Tyler Ennis running a ball screen with Henry Ellenson or Devin Robinson, all these guys played in the NBA. So you have to, really teach them, hey, that was 1 foot too high. You got to be a little lower than that. Or, that's a pass you can break up, or you got to impact the ball more, to your early point. Like, you got to get into the ball handler and really harp on those little details that will add up to one more stop here, one more stop there. And that is a difference between, at the end of the day, a 5-point loss and a 3-point win. I felt when I was coaching at a younger level, you're not that you're more of a perfectionist, but you would like to get a stop every time. Like, you're thinking that you may be able to get a stop physically every time. When you're coaching pros, you still would like to get a stop every time, but you're smart enough to understand, well, they're going to score 100 points or something like that at the end of the day. And we just got to score more and get those extra stops that will make the difference.
So I make the jest all the time that when Dave Smart was at Carleton, his goal was no longer to win games. It was to play a perfect game and actually get a stop every single possession, because that's how good they had gotten. Question for you directly, and it really applies to a lot of the guys that are in here. If you were ever to go back to like a college, university type level, which, I mean, let's be honest, they can't afford your knowledge at this point in Canada. But like, if you were ever to do it, would you implement a lot of the stuff that you see G League, NBA style of playing the screen and roll with two? Would you implement like a lot of similar type things defensively, and the mindset of not trying to correct every possession if you were at that level with guys who are not the caliber of athlete that you coach right now?
I definitely try to correct like every possession and try to get a stop, like to your point with Dave Smart, because I don't think I would have the same amount of respect for who I'm playing, not in a bad way, but like, it's not an NBA point guard in front of me. Like, the guy rolling to the rim is not Devin Robinson that can get 3 feet above the rim. Like, it's a very different. And we had Chris Boucher the year before. Like, these guys are elite at what they do, and I don't feel you have that in college or even on top of high school, you don't see it. So I feel I would try to correct and really try to get a stop all the time, but I may go with different schemes as well, because I feel like I'm not sure how well they shoot the three. And I think it varies from team to team, obviously. But, in the NBA, the problem, or the G League, the problem is that if the guy attacks the pick and roll and then you're tagging and then he finds the shooter, I mean, it's a catch and shoot three for a guy that, that is paid a lot of money to make those. So it's probably not a good shot to give up. Now, the question is it not a good shot to give up if you're flying out to contest it at the college level? Well, maybe it's a good shot to give up. Maybe it's a better shot to give up than a rim shot that could happen if you're playing it 2-on-2. So you have to see how efficient you are. And I think it all comes down to personnel on both teams. Like, when you're scouting the other team's personnel, if you're facing a team that shoots a lot of threes, well, you're probably not tagging as much. And also, how good are your defenders at playing the no roller behind scheme? That's one thing that's really, really important. Like, Henry Ellenson for us this year was really good, because he was good at playing, faking at the ball and trying to get the ball handler to pick it up, and then breaking the pass, retreating super quick. We had some guys that were really, really good at it. And we also had guys in the G League that were not good at it. So then at some point you were saying, well, if you're going no roller behind with, I don't know, Nicholas Baer, who was fantastic for us, but he's just not big. He's 6'7". He's not a 5. He's forced to play out of position. I mean, Nick Baer would hardly impact anything on those situations. He was great at doing other stuff, like, because he was so intense, but he doesn't have the length to cover both. And he knew that. So then that impacts your choices as well. So if you want to exploit a guy like Nick Baer, for example, to get back to him, like, maybe you get into a switching scheme, because maybe he can guard a smaller guy, or maybe you want to do something that's a little more aggressive, so he's going to hedge onto the ball for a couple steps. I mean, not that we've done that a lot, but that would come into your mindset and your approach to the game, depending on who you have and who they have on their team.
I would agree. So much of it is personnel based. So just a couple things I want to say. First, you were talking about all the film you do. Shout out to Will Rooney, my buddy who's on your staff there, takes care a lot of your film. I got a lot of respect for that guy. Second, when we're talking about like points per possession and what you guys do versus what we do, like for us specifically, and I've made this comparison before, but like where I'm at Fleming College, it's like we actually get more points per possession on a 15 to 18 foot jump shot than we did from the 3-point line last year. So it's like it's kind of annoying, but like it totally changes everything that you're trying to do as an offensive scheme, right? Where it's like, if I was to bring the same mentality to the next level, obviously you don't. Guys get quite a bit more points per possession from the 3-point line and changes everything. And then the one last thing that I wanted to touch on, sort of similar topic, was on the no roll behind and to tag or not tag, was just kind of the offensive rebounding that was happening. How would you guys clean this up? Because I felt, being in this drop coverage, a lot of guys were sort of getting the ball back. We end up with an N1 here. I think there were 2 or 3 examples like this that I thought were an interesting difference in the game. Just not being able to get this board, or this one, sorry, excuse me, I'm getting ahead here. To tag or not was what this was in. But then you ended up getting a lot of offensive rebounds, as I said, when you were not tagging. Whereas the difference was in this next clip here, you actually end up taking away the roll on this. And there was one more that ended up with the offensive rebound as well, I believe. Wide open in the paint, ends up with the putback and one. And again, right to the bucket. So the question that I was specifically looking for from all of those clips is, if we're going to stick with that coverage, what do we do about the offensive rebounding? How do we mitigate that factor?
Tell your dudes they got to play harder or they're coming out of the game. I mean, look at the point guard. All 3 of those clips, he just turns and stares at the rim. He doesn't even try to touch somebody or help on the glass or anything. I mean, I don't know if that's his responsibility, but for me, if we don't have all 5 guys to the defensive glass, you come out of the game.
Fair. What are the teaching points in drop coverage of rebounding? Sorry, Mike, if you had something, jump in there.
No worries. For me, it was always, if your man is outside 15 feet and you're inside or in the paint, take 2 steps toward him. If they're a foot in the paint or in the paint, take 1 step towards them. So they're always taking steps away from the rim, giving them more space to make that rebound and more room, and they're seeking contact. Because often the shot goes up and they're seeking the ball when they should be seeking their man first and then the ball, giving them space to rebound. Otherwise, we get over the back or whatever else.
Ahmed, I see you unmuting. You got something to add in there?
Yeah, this is such a good topic. I've spoken to a lot of coaches. I've changed my stance, and I don't teach blocking out anymore. I don't know how many of you still teach that. I don't.
It's gone away as well. Sorry.
For me, it's a waste of time. For me, it's very old school mentality to hit, locate. The athletes are faster, are stronger, are way better, athletes. Go get it. That's what we teach. So in our system, shot goes up, go get the ball. Go get the ball. We're not going to worry about, boxing out. We're not going to worry about, all these things. I want you to go hit, or go get it, right? If on the way, you got to fight with a guy to get it, you go right ahead and do that. But go get the ball.
Excuse me as I sip a drink here. Does anybody else have a similar philosophy? So for me, it's dependent, right? So I teach guys to get to certain spots on the floor. And then if there are people that are going to or already in those certain spots on the floor, now you're boxing, now you're fighting type deal. But I believe quite a bit more in shot tracking and understanding where things are going to go from there. I wonder if anybody else shares that similar philosophy. Like,
my point guard goes to the free throw line. That nail, we tracked it. There was a lot of, and actually Chris Oliver spoke about this last year. The nail position is such an important factor to win, to get a rebound. That I personally, for me, I send my point guard there every time. When we get the rebound, that also gives my point guard direction to be able to go either or, to catch and run, right? That way we get into our transition. right? So rebounding now plays a huge part with our transition offense because we want to get it. We wanted to get the ball up in 3 seconds, right? We want to get into our early offense right away within the first 6 seconds, 7 seconds. So if I'm sending my guy to the nail, now it gives them direction to see where the opening is, and boom, we're blasting out of it.
Coach, what do you do if the point guard's guy shoots a corner three? Then you get no nail coverage, right?
Sorry, say that one more time, Brett.
If the point guard is guarding shoots a corner three, and the only guy you have covering the nail is the point guard, you get no nail coverage in that scenario, or? We
will. So what we'll teach is, so I have my two guard who also is a ball handler as well. So one of the two guys, whoever's in the corner shooting, you're obviously worrying about the closeout there, right? We're gonna get the second guy coming in, so that nail spot is always filled, always.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach a lot of cover the elbows as well. So I'm not always on the nail type deal, but I think it's really dependent on what you see in film for other teams and what they're doing, right? So like that is actually something that I'll put in my scout. So we got a few CCAA guys in here, which is the league that I coach in for those of you who don't know. But like when I'm scouting, say a George Brown or a Fanshaw or anything like that, when I'm scouting that, one of the things I'll be looking for is like how they rebound. So like Seneca College, which is in our division up here, they're an undersized team this past year, but they're one of the better rebounding teams because they sandwich rebound, they cover their elbows or they cover the nail type deal, and they try to tip like their initial rebounders aren't trying to get the ball because they're undersized. They're actually just trying to tip it to locations on the floor for other people to recover. Charles, at next level, what are your thoughts on this at all? Like, is it something you look at? Is it something that's correctable? In this game, this all stems from the conversation, obviously, of like you're in drop coverage, guys are getting their own rebounds. We're waiting the question of tagging versus not tagging, which you've mentioned. Obviously, you're probably not going to switch up your philosophy. I know Jimmy's definitely not going to switch up his philosophy. But that being said, like, you know, is it just a question of, hey, be better, or are there teaching points on the rebounding element here?
Rebounding is a very important thing for us. There's very interesting points that have been discussed in the last few minutes. I kind of agree with Coach Ahmad a little bit with not boxing out, just from a personal standpoint, not from like a team philosophy with the Raptors 905. But in terms of, I think you need to box out sometimes. I think if you spend too much time, where I agree with you with this, you spend too much time teaching boxing out. I mean, players don't box out all the time, even if you teach it and teach it and teach it and teach it, because they have a hunger for the ball. They want to go get it. And I'm not going to prevent my guys from going to get it by telling them to prevent the other guys from getting it, especially when philosophically, when you think about it, defensively, in theory, you should be in better position to grab the rebound because you should be a little closer to the rim. So when the ball is shot and it typically stays in the air for about roughly a second, like a second to a second and a half on a long shot before it hits the rim, why would your mentality be like, get away from the rim, get away from rebounding areas? I understand the point that was made that if you take a step, away, you're going to create more space in front of you. But the question is, depending on where you are on the court, is that really necessary? Because a lot of guys don't offensive rebound anymore. Like they like transition defense has been put at such a premium in the NBA for the last 20 years. And Greg Popovich being one of the coaches that, was heavy on that for so many years, that now a lot of times your guy is not even trying to go get it. So why would you take a step towards him? I mean, if it really increases because you're underneath the rim, I get it. But if I'm standing, 12 feet away from the rim, maybe I should just go get the ball. Like maybe it's the right thing to do, just take a quick glance at my guy and just turn around and go get it. So what I personally teach is boxing out is something that can be done with the body or with your eyes. So you should always take a look at least at what your guy is doing and have a quick recognition. Is he coming at me like to come get it? And if he does, then yes, it should be a physical box out. Unless I'm an elite rebounder that doesn't need to box out, I don't think I would tell Dennis Rodman, you need to box out. Just go and fucking get it. But if my guy's coming at me and he's got a decent physical ability that could lead to him getting the offensive rebound over me, then it should be a physical box out. If my guy's not making a step towards the rim, to me it's a box out with the eyes. Like my box out is just looking at you, and then I'm turning around. And it's not that I'm against boxing out. It's more that I'm in heavy favor of the pursuit of the ball, which is the most important thing in rebounding. And that's what I think the good rebounders are really good at. They pursue it like crazy. So, and for guards, you can have really good teaching points like coming to the nail or coming to the elbow, but it all comes down to one thing. It's a matter of we should all 5 guys pursue the basketball. And some guys will need to put a physical body on someone first. They will need to tag someone, like not tagging in terms of pick and roll, but they will need to tag a guy because that guy is 4 feet away from the rim. And it's, in this case, it's Eric Mika, who's one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. I think he was averaging over 5 offensive rebounds per game. This team was top 5 in the league in offensive rebounding. So yes, you got to put bodies on people at some point. That doesn't mean all 5 guys should do it. And to me, it's just my personal taste. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. The fact that you would have a specific position going to the nail or the elbow, and then to say, I think it was a great question that was asked after that, what do you do if there's a corner 3? And then you need a plan B in place. I think you need a lot of time to coach that. Whereas if you just tell them all, we should all fucking pursue the basketball, get involved, do something, don't stand there. And then I think if you teach that as a general concept, somebody will come to the nail or the elbows 95% of the time. So not that I think that it's not a good point. It's just I'm not sure I would spend a lot of time telling, point guard needs to go there, shooting guard needs to go there. Because I think on various situations, you'll just go wherever it makes sense to pursue it.
So one of the big things that I personally have implemented with my team is that, and I stole this from other coaches. I heard it as well, but I don't like spending a lot of time coaching rebounding or doing rebounding type drills, etc. So at the beginning of every season, I do a yearly training plan, and we're not working with a 3 practice to 1 game type ratio or anything like that. It's way worse. Sometimes it's under 1 practice to 1 game in certain parts of the season. So just because of a time constraint, I don't want to spend a lot of time in practice going over that. So what I'll do to implement the desire, the hunger is I'll use scoring systems that seriously disadvantage giving up an offensive rebound. So let's say we're playing to, 5 or 8 as a team in whatever drill we're doing, then an offensive rebound will be worth 3 or 4 type deal. So it ends the game quite a bit faster, but then if you're on the team that just gave up an offensive rebound, that guy who is supposed to be taking care of that is going to hear from the other players on the team. He's not going to make that mistake again. The scoring system, there's so much value in the scoring system, in my opinion, to just get guys more motivated, because it's to me, so much of this, especially as you get into higher levels, everybody talks about the speed of the game, but to me, it's the thought process of the game. Can you put 3 or 4 things together? Do you know what's coming next? In a series of events, can you combine things and execute properly? So a lot of guys will take care of the principal action of defense or something, but then this guy gets by on a reject and he shoots a floater and it's off, and they're still standing, just like Brant said, 10 feet away, because you're I got beat, and there's no time for the mental lapse. You have to put things together. So you have to be thinking, well, I got beat, but I have a responsibility to get that rebound at this point type deal, and the scoring system helps. I'm just going to read Greg's comment before we move on. So Greg's at Fanshawe, and he said, we focus a lot on guard rebounding because our league is a 3-point heavy league. Bigs control the paint, and our guards go get the ball. So 5-6 rebounds a game is sort of the reasonable measure that they've implemented to be a goal for their guards. And that's a big thing for us too. We're very guard heavy as well. The biggest player on my team last year was 6'5". So our guards need to help out. It's that simple. There's no time to stand around on the defensive end. The next thing that I want to get into, I want to guide it a little bit. I think there's only one topic, so I'm going to skip ahead. But this was a big deal in this game, in my opinion. Obviously, you guys were up 14 in the 4th quarter. And if you had the chance with similar rosters to play a game, I think this would be a big difference. Was the idea of A, playing with the lead, and B, transition threes, what you guys think about them, how you guard them. Are you instructing your players to take them? So I'm going to share real quick. This was a huge difference in this game, in my opinion. Like CDB said, Isaiah Cannon just got hot, and we'll take a look at some of these. I mean, and then just a little bit of bad luck here to the topic of playing with the lead. Obviously, this is shrunk down to 4 points here, but they end up with some good rotation. But this has a lot to do with momentum changing. Gesundheit, whoever that is. You know, Ennis falls down. There's good rotation in the back, but you end up with a 3, and bang, we're down to 1 point. So what do you guys think about playing with the lead? What are you instructing your guys when you're up and you see it starting to shrink? And if you don't have the timeout to burn, or you don't feel that it's the right idea, are you still motivational? Like, how are you approaching that situation? And then the second half of that is transition threes. Are you allowing your guys to take them? Do you think they're a good shot for you? And who can shoot them? What sort of things that you have in place that allows certain people to be able to shoot them? Let me ask Charles directly then, since nobody wants to break the ice on that one. Charles.
Oh, I thought you were asking Charles.
I thought that was to Charles.
I'm sorry. No, that was to everybody. Go ahead, please. Like, what do you guys – so, like, just like Greg said, Raps were 5 of 23 from 3. Would be looking back at how we got our threes and how Stockton guarded actions that led to the 3. So the interesting thing about that is I specifically noticed that, Greg, when I was looking through all this, the Raptors were 5 of 23 from 3, but 2 of their 3-pointers were in transition. So is it a good shot for you? Are you allowing them to continue to do it? And at all levels, does that apply to you guys in the way that you coach as well? Anybody, jump, please.
I'll get into it. I'm a huge. I know Greg's on the call, but I love transition threes. I don't know if you guys, any of you watched the game last night, the Utah game. Utah, went down, and they went up, and then they went down, and they kept it going.
Sorry, Amit, can I jump in real quick? Just my random thought about last night's game. Why isn't Zion playing in the last 2 minutes? Isn't that an important thing to have on the floor? Total tangent, but I was upset about that last night. Finish your thought, Amit. I'm
$1 million, man. So I love keeping the momentum going for us. Whether we're up or down, we don't want to change our style. And in the fourth quarter, we might, again, it depends on the game situation. I like the transition 3 because it's a high percentage shot for us. You're going down. I know some coaches like to burn clock, but sometimes I can come back and bite you in the butt. So if it's one of my green light shooters, so we have green light, yellow light, and red light shooters. If it's a red light shooter shooting it, not going to happen. They're not shooting it. If it's a green light shooter, 100%, right? Like, we want to keep the momentum going. Either we're up or we're down. For me, just keep playing your game, right? Charles might have a different, perspective on that, or any of you guys, but that's kind of where I'm at. I like the transition 3.
I think it's catch 22 too. Like you take transition threes, you make them, you win, and you look great. You slow the game down and you win, you look great. And if you lose in either one of those scenarios, you get blown up by everybody. You know what I mean? So, like, I think for me, I don't mind the transition 3, kind of like what Ahmad said. If it's one of your guys and they're wide open in transition, at what point in the possession, if you pull it out and slow it down, are you going to get a wide open 3 for one of your best players? Like, so for me, I don't have a problem with it. I think there does have to come a point in the game, whatever level you're at, where you do have your slowdown mark, where maybe in the NBA where each team's only going to have 3 possessions left, or in college, the 90-second mark or whatever. There's got to be some cutoff where if you have a lead, okay, now it's almost to the point where it's out of reach. Now we can slow it down. You know what I mean? But I think until you hit that point, you got to play.
No, I agree. It's funny, just for those of you watching the replay later on or whatever, there's a complete side discussion about my side comment going on in the chat right now. But the transition 3 is an interesting one for me, because when I played back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, everything was very different from coaching philosophy. And I used to love the transition 3, and I was good at it. I shot it pretty well. And a lot of coaches would be like, no, don't do that. Like, we didn't play with a shot clock. I mean, it was like, slow it down, get a better shot. And my argument was always like, what's a better shot than that? Like, I'm the best shooter on our team right now. And, tooting my own horn, once upon a time back then, it's like, I'm the best shooter on the team right now, and I'm wide open in transition. Why is there a better shot? So
Greg just made a good point.
What did he say? I missed it.
Read Greg's point. You made a really good point.
Do you ever worry about slowing down? End game takes your own guys out of their rhythm. Yes, I worry about that often. So one of the things that was in the question that I asked was, how do you establish who's allowed to shoot those kinds of shots, right? Because like everybody talks about, and the premise of this show is having a sample size to work with what you're doing going forward or whatever. But like, guys show up to practice, and a lot of the time, especially at my level, all of them think that they're home run hitters. And in my opinion, all of them are definitely not home run hitters. So like, what do you implement? What do you put in place that allows them to be able to be like, hey, in the game, you can do this because you've demonstrated that you can do this in practice or in skill development, etc.
So for us, we obviously have a hierarchy of shooting and everything, but for transition 3s and what it comes down to, even for the guys that you might say have a red light or have a very poor frequency of like shouldn't be allowed to shoot one without a paint touch or whatever rules we have in place, in transition, for me, as long as you're balanced, you're allowed to shoot. Because it's not a wasted shot. It's the runners, it's the last second 3 or whatever, versus if there's a guy and he's in his spot and my players know where they're more successful, whether it's a stand and shoot or at a transition, something they started working on in this past year that they apparently never worked on before. But it's go touch half, full sprint down, get to your spot, balance, shoot. And it's those fatigue shots and getting the reps up where it resulted in game results afterwards. But for us, it's even if a guy dribbles down and has the ball in his hands, if he's in balance and he has a perceptual understanding in his body, if he can get a shot off, I don't mind it. There's at times when, okay, it's 5-on-5, you just pulled in a guy's face for no reason. But there's other times where it's truly transition. He knows there's guys coming behind him that might be attacking the rim or looking for a rebound or whatever it may be. As long as they're balanced, to me, you're allowed to shoot at times.
Within
Michael?
your hierarchy, you mean?
No, certain. I've honestly allowed a big to shoot a transition 3 because the guard came down. The big was slow and cumbersome, but he stopped with 3-point line, took it and shot it. Why not? There's nobody there. I don't mind in that instance. But the hierarchy plays into more full live sets and transition. If you could get to your spot or wherever it is. Yeah.
Michael, a question for you. Do you have a system where you're tracking their shooting in practice, and then that's kind of how you you find out who your shooters are, etc.?
So we have system, yes. If I had more student managers like they have in the States, I'd be a lot more intent and be where I want to be with it. But to an end where it's more games approach and the players play each other for hierarchy spots. And it bases down to what statistics they had coming in, what statistics they had prior. And out of certain drills, we track their shots or they track their own. So we have an understanding. But we had one athlete who I think was shooting 14% or less from the corner 3s. But prior to the season, it was our understanding that that was his more comfortable spot. We worked on certain balancings and certain shooting, and he ended up winning us the championship and bombing 3s from the logo. But it was a guy who didn't have the confidence or wherewithal in the beginning of the season, but by the end of it, he found success.
Nice. Charles, at your level, is the philosophy any different, or do you just kind of green light the shot overall?
I would say the latter. Like, we green light the shot overall. I think it's to me, I don't think there's anything like right or wrong with the transition 3. I think, to me, I see it more as any possession that ends up with a shot. Do you like that shot or not? and there's a million things that come into it. And like who takes it? Obviously, if I like the transition three way better if it's Henry Ellenson taking it than if it's Devin Robinson, right. And there might be a situation. So that's why I think it's hard to have like any super hard rules on it. It's just like, okay, well, Henry Ellenson is a smart basketball player. So he knows what shots he should take and not take. And I think as you get your players smarter, I mean, that's why I think it's hard to say this guy's a complete green light. I mean, obviously if you have JJ Redick, he is that. But if some players at some point it will be a decent shot for them and it will never be one for Shaquille O'Neal, for example. So, but it's hard to tell a player, oh, we want these shots or we don't want them. I would more say, when I'm watching film with them, it's like, well, maybe this one was not a good one. Or like, it's early in the clock, they're on a 6-0 run and you're pulling up from three in transition as we're trying to build rhythm. Might not be and I'm trying to increase their IQ while doing that. And there's players that may take, 45 transition threes in a season. And there's players that it might be okay for them to take 3 transition threes in a season. So I think everything comes down to what's the context, how open were you on balance, elements that were mentioned right there. And you're trying to increase the awareness of each player because we do a lot of individual film with them. So I got a certain number of players. Charles Kissy has a certain number of players. Ryan Schmidt has a certain number of players. And we all work with our guys to tell them, well, the nuances of like, you should take those. That one was right. Like I had Jawan Evans. He's not a great shooter. But to someone's earlier point, if he's in rhythm, in transition, and he nails it, and it was the right time to take it, then it's fine. He probably shouldn't do it 5 times a game, but maybe that one was the right moment to do it. So to me, I would try to isolate every shot in a vacuum a little more and try to comment those and try to increase the overall awareness in players in the team more than having like hard rules. And us as a team with the 905, we're more like, hey, if you're open, you should shoot. Like, so we want to play fast. We want to have some pace. We want to get in transition. If you get an open 3 in transition, shoot it because we're working on it in practice. But that doesn't mean that if you're Devin Robinson that you should take 4 of those per game.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up there?
Yep.
So you have individuals like, let's say, Joel Embiid, you saw the progression of it, and Jonas Valanciunas and other bigs, and now you have Bol doing it, but I know there's other athletes who may be working on a skill in practice like that transition 3. How do you coach that, whether it's with video or player development, to get them to the point where not only as a coach, but as a player, they're comfortable shooting that transition 3, and you're not seeing instances where other players are now mad at that player for running down, and instead of rim running, they stop and shoot a 3. So I hear that discussion all the time, whether Embiid shoots too many threes or not. But my question is now more transition and coaching that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, to me, by definition, that could never happen. But I always relate it to what's our team average, basically. Like, I would like every shot to be an above average shot. So, and at some point, we can all get it. And we could probably say that, especially with a player of Joel Embiid's stature, that you could say, well, he's taking a 3 there. Like when I watch him play, every time he shoots a 3, I'm like, damn, he should get to the rim. But I also believe that it also makes him special that he's able to shoot 3s. But if I would coach against him and he's a 30% 3-point shooter, well, I want him standing outside the 3-point line. I don't want to deal with, the headaches he would give me, offensive rebounding and finishing around the rim and getting free throw line all the time. So I'd be very happy if Joel Embiid shot 10 3-pointers per game against my team. So if I reverse it and I'm coaching him, I'm going to tell him, well, Joel, they're probably happy that you're shooting that shot. We are happy that you are shooting one of these here and there, because if you make those and you're showing them that you have that range, it changes the way they will have to guard certain actions. And I don't know if Joel Embiid shooting in transition is ever a good shot, but in the half court, I think it could be for spacing purposes. So to answer that question, I think it always comes down to, is Joel Embiid, for example, in transition, is that an above average shot for your team or a below average shot for your team? And if every shot was an above average shot, you tell me, well, then your average increases, and then there's some of those will become below average by definition, but that's how I would approach those shots.
Okay. I should use Phoenix as an example because I swear all three of their bigs are now shooting those transition threes. And one guy hit, a record threes last season, right? But then you see Kaminsky coming down and shooting those same shots. And I'm just like, it doesn't feel the same or look the same at times.
Yeah. And it's an endless debate, obviously, because in the coach's room, we will watch clips and we disagree all the time. We're like, is that a good shot or not? And to come back on the Raptors run last season when, the Sixers or the Bucks, the Bucks is probably the better example. The Bucks play a deep drop coverage with Brook Lopez, and they are happy to let Marc Gasol shoot a three from the top of the arc every possession down the court, literally, because they know that Marc Gasol will not shoot 57 of them in a game. Like, he will pass them up at some point, and it plays into their hands when he does. So if you are the Raptors, are you happy with Marc Gasol taking a three every possession? And some coaches would argue yes, and some coaches would argue no. And there's a debate on that. So for the full thing about the shots that the defense wants you to take and the shots that you want to take, like to your point, like Frank Kaminsky, is that the shot you really want? And maybe that's the shot that they want us to take as well. So where do I find the balance? And I also want to keep Frank Kaminsky confident. That's also an element, because at some point you want him to make threes because he's a good three-point shooter. And if you keep telling him, well, don't shoot that one, well, now when it's the time to shoot it, maybe he still has in mind you telling him not to shoot. So sometimes the overall mentality to, just let it rip and let it fly, some players will feel more confident and you will also make more threes. And that's an important part of shooting. Like, it doesn't just come down to numbers. It comes down to, if the player's feeling well and he feels confident and he knows you're trusting him, he's probably going to make more. And then it becomes a better shot. So it's hard to find the right answer on that. But those are things I believe that it's important to keep in mind when you're defining for your team what's a good shot and what's not a good shot.
So interesting points, all in there for sure. And I could talk about this for hours. Actually, a portion, excuse me. So I did my master's on coaching manual, and a large portion of it was shot selection. So I was fortunate that I could finish my capstone by doing basketball type stuff very specifically. And just like you said, it's subjective, and the discussion can go on for a long time, obviously weighing in personnel, weighing in the math of it over time, et cetera. I do want to say that we are at the hour, excuse me. And when I positioned this to you, Charles, I let you know that it would be about an hour. You let me know what you're time-wise. For those of you who are Rising Coaches members, obviously there's another thing going on. I'm going to let this kind of play out just a little bit longer, but I'm going to stop the recording here. So if you want to jump in to what Rising Coaches has got going on, please feel free. Charles, if you have to jump off, let me know, obviously. But, before we move on, I just want to say giant thanks to you for jumping in and sharing your point of view with us. Really, really appreciate it. And next week, I'm going to do the Carleton-Dalhousie National Championship game of Canada. So that'll be the next run it back for next week. So if you guys get a chance, jump in and hop in on that. But other than that, the last point I just want to make is shout out to Rising Coaches for giving me this platform to pursue this creative endeavor. And, beyond that, I think that's pretty much it for this week at this point. The only two things I wanted to cover beyond this were need a three end of game versus a switching defense, and talking a little bit more about playing with a lead. But I think this is sort of a natural break to leave it where it's at and stop the recording. So thanks, guys, for being a part. Huge thanks, Charles. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.
All right. So